Welcome everybody. We'll get going in just a few moments. I'm just waiting for people to join us. I'll just give it a few moments longer. Well, I think we may have some more people joining us, but we'll let those people come in as they do. And I think we should start. So just to say, my name is Douglas West. I'm one of the professors in the marketing group here at the, I was going to say here on the 8th floor of the business school, but as you can see, this is just an image behind me. I wish I was on the 8th floor of the business school. Welcome to our connections this afternoon. We have a very interesting topic and a very interesting speaker, and I would like to also introduce that we have a student panelist with us as well, who's going to be looking at the questions that you may have. But first of all, can I introduce to you Dr. Gillian Kingston, who is a research director at M&C Saatchi's World Services, and she's going to be giving us a talk, as you can see, on strategy and research in social marketing. And I thought it'd be nice to give you a little bit of background about Jill. She has a really interesting background. Actually has one foot in academia and one foot in business. I mean, both feet are in business, obviously, but she also has the ability to operate very strongly as an academic. She is an executive fellow at the business school, and we welcome her to many of our meetings and discussing the direction of the business school. But in her role at Saatchi's, she's responsible for working on global studies to inform and evaluate social marketing and communications campaigns. And she works for organizations including the Gates Foundation, as you'll know from Bill Gates, World Health Organization, and UNICEF, just to name a few. She's worked on issues including maternal and child health, sexual and reproductive health, education, tackling stigma and discrimination against minority groups. So some really interesting and extremely important areas. And before joining Saatchi, Jill previously worked for BBC Media Action, where she evaluated health communication campaigns across Asia and Africa. And as I said before about the academic side, she's also lectured at Trinity College Dublin, excellent university, and holds a PhD in sociology from there. So we're very grateful for Jill giving us her time and to come to speak to her. I also said I would introduce our student discussant, who is going to be looking at the chat boxes. And in particular, we'd like you to use the Q&A box for any questions that you may have for Jill. And our discussant is Joanna Petrova. She's a first-year MSc International Marketing student, part-time, at the business school, and is an academic representative for her year group. Joanna is a marketing professional with years of experience in the fields of digital and experiential marketing, and her master's degree, she's using it as a way for her to develop her expertise and further her research. So after years as a manager in a boutique agency, she started her own marketing company last year, which we wish her all the luck with a focus on sustainability. So it ties very nicely with Jill's presentation. So that's enough from me. So I would like to invite Dr. Gillian Kingston to talk about strategy and research in social marketing.
Thank you very much, Doug, and good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to virtually connect, unfortunately not in person. And today I'm going to give you an overview of how strategy and research informs successful social marketing campaigns. So I'm sure you're all very aware of what social marketing is. Just to recap, it's marketing designed to create social change. So this is marketing that is not designed to directly benefit a company or a brand. So it's not to be confused with woke washing, which a lot of brands do more lately, where they use social issues in order to advertise their brand. Social marketing is about raising awareness of a problem or a cause, and it aims to convince an audience to change their behaviours. And so a successful social marketing campaign is actually able to sell a beneficial behavior. And when it's done well, it presents a compelling and simple way to create change. And it makes this beneficial behavior more desirable than any competing behavior. Ultimately, you're looking at your metric of success is not sales, but it's about uptake of behaviors or shifts in attitudes. So I work for M&C Saatchi, who are a very large global independent communications and advertising network. And Saatchi, has basically its modus operandus is to create within-house businesses who are bespoke to different issues or different technologies or different clients. And I actually work for World Services, who are a non-commercial entity of Saatchi. And basically it takes the best of the commercial network and applies these skills in non-commercial domains and with non-commercial clients. And we work on issues across the world. We have three core practice areas. So first and foremost, we focus on social and behavioral change. Within that as well, we look at advocacy and communications. And I'm part of the research, insight and evaluation team. And underlying this, we work on capacity building, because the way that we work is whenever we're brought on to work on a campaign or an issue, or indeed as part of a consortium within a country, we also work with local partners and with local staff in order to create and work on any campaign. And so sometimes what we work on as well is not only the campaign as in itself, but also capacity building local organizations so that they can then take on the campaign longer term. So Saatchi, not only World Services, but the Saatchi agency has a long history of working in health-related issues. We have been working with NHS and formerly Public Health England for quite a few years, and including the NHS campaign this summer for losing weight in relation to COVID, which I'll showcase in a minute, and also the very famous Change for Life campaign. But we also work with a very broad range of clients, both who are bi and multilaterals, such as the World Food Programme or WHO. We then work with governments, such as the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. And then we work with NGOs and also academic partners. And what we do, our main, approach is to take approaches that you would in the commercial sector about selling products, but in this case, sell social change. And so one of our main approaches with anything we do is in focusing on the insights. And in this talk, I'm going to give an overview of 4 of the key main pillars that we take in any approach to any of our campaigns. But first and foremost comes the insight, and we have a legacy of transformative insights. So this ad here on the right is one of the first, contraception promotion adverts in the UK in the 60s. And basically the framing was, instead of being a top-down rational argument, it was about thinking about what if it was you that got pregnant instead, and would you be more careful if that was the case? The ad on the left is also quite famous. It's for Transport for London. And here the brief was to create an advert to ultimately incentivize teenagers to slow down and stop speeding. And in the focus groups at the start of the actual research, they realized that, again, using top-down rational messaging such as don't speed or speeding kills, isn't that appealing to teenagers, because, you feel you're immortal when you're 17. So instead, it's about taking away what's important to them. And here, driving actually makes them feel like an adult and empowers them. So it's the idea of the insight of, okay, well, you can motivate people by telling them what will be taken away from them, and this will help to shift their behavior. So our approach with everything we do is to first and foremost understand where we are now. So before any campaign, any advocacy program, anything that we're doing, we first and foremost map and identify where the needle lies. And so this might be a range of actual applied primary research, or as well just looking at the market and any marketing that might exist already around our desired behavior or area of change as well. We then work with strategists. So I'm part of the research team, but I work with strategists to understand where do we want to be. And that is, again, looking at the brief, looking at the end goal. We then map out how we will get there. So this is the translation. And then ultimately evaluation is also very, very key to successful social marketing, because ultimately not everything works. And the first thing you need to do is when things don't work is understand why they don't work so they can inform success in the future, or indeed inform changes. So as I said, I'm going to give an overview of 4 kind of central pillars to any successful social marketing approach. So first and foremost, I've mentioned this several times already, this is really about acting like as if you're selling a product, but instead you're selling as a behavior. So no matter what you're selling, you have to first and foremost understand and act like your competitors. So understand your market and who are the competitors, what are the desirable things they're selling, and how do we position our sell as a desirable product as well. And so, as I said, we have a legacy of working in health, especially, and I'm currently leading a study for the World Health Organization across 9 countries. So we, in anything we do in health, we treat it again like a commercial kind of approach. And so first and foremost, we understand that there are multiple influences on unhealthy behaviors. And so we employ consumer-orientated market research, segmentation, and targeting to understand what are the influences on behaviors and what is it that, either enables or prevents people from adopting or maintaining healthy behaviors. We also speak not only to understanding influences, but we speak to influencers, and we really try to map the environment to understand, the customer journey on a day-to-day moment in their life, and how they do or don't do what, we hopefully would like them to do, or that the client has commissioned us to do. And then using all of this research, we can then map and understand decision-making processes and ultimately create and identify targets around the barriers and enablers to adopting healthy behaviors. So as I mentioned, I'm currently working on a study for WHO where we're looking at what are the influences on infant feeding decisions. And so this is looking both at whether people want to breastfeed or formula feed, and then ultimately how they feed their infants, and also looking at influencers as well. So what are the views not only of women, but what are the views of health professionals, their partners, their family and friends around infant feeding in each country. So here, first and foremost, we want to again understand who are our competitors and what are they doing. So our competitors are, either in the case of looking at breastfeeding, are why and when are people formula feeding, but also looking at unhealthy foods that might be given to infants, and when people adopt behaviors that aren't necessarily pro breastfeeding. We want to look and map those. So we use a range of techniques. Research isn't just about employing focus groups. We do things like ask people to collect phone diaries to map their week. We do social listening, where we actually map networks and themes and sentiment around subjects online. And then, as I said, we speak to influencers as well to really understand the whole domain and the corpus of the decision. We also then look at campaigns that haven't been successful or that maybe didn't take the right approach. So this is a campaign run by a UK hospital where basically their message was, if you breastfeed, then you have more money to buy quite horrendous shoes, to be honest. But this idea was, very much refuted by when it was tested amongst this campaign went live, but it didn't pick up positive sentiment. I think a lot of people felt, a lot of the feedback around it on Twitter and other social forums was that it was very patronizing and also quite sexist as well. So really, when we undertake any campaign, we want to identify, first and foremost, what our competitor is doing, and also previous campaigns, and looking at what has succeeded, what hasn't, and what can we add, and ultimately turning our behavior into a product. So what are our product's attributes, what is the brand positioning, and how do we make our product, which is the behavior, more appealing? Second central pillar to what we do and in any kind of approach is understanding and creating the enabling environment and keeping it lit. So here, the enabling environment means actually understanding, it's one thing saying and trying to appeal to people to adopt behaviors or to shift negative attitudes, but how do we actually create the enabling environment to do that? Because really, change doesn't happen when it's a one-time point firework, as we say. Change happens when it's a bonfire that can grow and sustain over time. And in order to do this, we need a kind of diffusion of innovation. So we need change to be adopted by several different people within society, and for conversations and actions to grow and sustain over time. So in order to understand our narrative, our positioning, and our key messages, we have said we adopt and collect research proof points across all these various domains that I mentioned before, such as focus group discussions, actually looking at social listening and looking at the market. And we bring all these together to then try and understand at what point should we bring in our emotionally engaging narrative and positioning. And what is it? What is our brand? What is the look and feel of our brand? And what is our brand actually? How is it positioning itself, and what is it selling? So Change for Life is a campaign that M&C Saatchi have worked on for now over 10 years. And it's an NHS campaign designed to, help people adopt healthy behaviours. But instead of it, again, being a rational top-down campaign, this whole campaign and whole movement was informed by the whole idea of creating enabling environments for healthy eating. So creating aspirational framing, such as change for life. So this isn't just a one-time point, go on a diet, lose a few pounds, and then forget about it in 6 weeks' time. This is like a more seismic shift in your life about eating well, moving more, and living longer. And so prior to designing the campaign and the approach, what was key was speaking to, all the different target audiences and learning from them in order to understand what is it that's turning them off the behavior that we are trying to sell. And so, for example, with mothers, we found when discussing about whether or not you cook healthy dinners, they found that a convenience means that quite often convenience and busyness quite often means that you end up cooking unhealthy food or buying unhealthy food. So here, the first insight that we realized was that the campaign had to be about taking away the guilt and stop, to try, it's modern life that's the problem. It's not you, mom. So here it's about the framing and the positioning. It's also about realizing that this isn't, in the spirit of not letting off fireworks, but building bonfires. What's key to a successful campaign and a long-term campaign is about bringing on all different players on board. So here we worked with major national retailers, household brands, government departments, and NGOs, create this Change for Life movement. Again, when understanding, what is successful, you need to understand what your competitors do in order to entice people. And so here it was understanding, what is it that unhealthy food is doing so well, and how does marketing work, and how does it affect informed decision making, and then how do you create content that will help to people to enable them to make healthier decisions. So here, the Sugar Swap app was created, which was a creative way to reveal hidden sugar in food. And I'll show an advert about this in a minute. But this was about not only, giving people an understanding of what's healthy and what's not, but it's also about, ultimately attacking your competitors. So highlighting the weakness of your competitors, and that being the amount of sugar that's in foods that you least expect. And ultimately, it's about creating marketing target or copying marketing targets of other, big commercial brands. So it's about, having a customer relationship management program, about having incentives for people and appealing products. And so Change for Life, again, wasn't just a one-time campaign that went out on above the line, channels such as TV and radio, but it was also about apps and other community movements within doctors and all supermarkets and all different places, so that you're seeing this that becomes something that's part of your day-to-day life.
Some British children are eating their own body weight in sugar every year. That's almost 5,500 sugar cubes, which is the weight of an average 5-year-old.
44 packets of sugar in this one. 44! Why don't you say specifically how much sugar there is in this can, for example?
Yes, it's prompted Public Health England to launch a major campaign about the dangers of too much sugar, complete with a new phone app to help parents.
This app, together with a new advertising campaign, has been developed to raise awareness of how much sugar is contained in food and drink and to help people switch to healthier alternatives.
For Becky, this means instant access to sugar content.
So 25 sugar cubes.
14.4 sugar cubes.
Wow.
Wow.
That's a big number.
So today I can announce that we will introduce
So that was just an example of, the Change for Life campaign. Next, I'm going to move on to the third, central pillar to any approach that we take with any social marketing or advocacy campaign. And that is really about focusing on the detail, because the devil really is in the detail. So this is, we have worked in the past with the Nike Foundation Girl Effect. And Girl Effect is all about empowering adolescent girls and young women across sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. And so within each country that they work in, Girl Effect take a very bespoke approach in order to understand how they're going to communicate messages around adolescent empowerment, education, sexual and reproductive health, and other issues that are, very pertinent within the country. And so Girl Effect decided that they were going to work in Malawi with PEPFAR, who are a big aid organization. And they wanted to get across messages around all the issues that I just mentioned. And so it was decided that they were going to create a youth brand and with Girl Effect to actually create this brand in terms of understanding not only what the brand would be and how it would be communicated and who would be in it, but also looking at the style of the brand, the look, the feel, the approach, and undertaking research to really understand what was needed in the country. So first and foremost, we undertook focus group discussions across Malawi to really understand what were the issues and where did the need lie in terms of these issues, but then also co-creation workshops with adolescent girls and young women to really understand what they would like to watch, listen to, or read, and really what would cut through, because a lot of the material we found around these key issues in terms of previous social marketing and health communication and campaigns were very dry, very boring. And so really what was key here was creating something that was for adolescent girls, but actually by them as well. And in terms of the detail, the devil really is in it. We went down to the actual minutiae to really understand the look and the feel of this brand and its actual content and output as well. So we worked with young girls, as I say, and with semioticians and people from other marketers within the country to really understand what the look and feel is and isn't, and right down to the patterns and the layers of what people wear. And the formative research was very key as well then in understanding and informing the brand, but also creating metrics in which we could measure success against, because we wanted to understand where attitudes and behaviors lay before we started the actual campaign, and then where they came afterwards. And so Saatchi, the brand, was disseminated across radio, TV, magazines, community listening groups, and other various different outputs and across Malawi. And here again, I'm going to show a video because it's a lovely overview of what the brand looked like. as I said, research is also vital, because not everything works, and sometimes you can create the glossiest, jazziest campaign and it might not reach people, or indeed people might not appreciate it or feel it's not appropriate. And so when we'd actually when we worked with Girl Effect then afterwards to evaluate the campaign, looking at the success of the campaign and what was working and what wasn't. And really what's key here as well is understanding regular consumers of the brand. And overall, the campaign did very well in terms of shifting the dial on people's attitudes around the behaviours and the areas that we were looking at. Final pillar I'm going to talk about today is the power of the insight. And I mentioned this earlier, but it really is key to any, obviously, private commercial marketing campaign, but also any social marketing campaign as well. And if you don't do it right, it can be to your detriment. So here, this particular campaign I'm going to talk about, we were working with the Global Fund. So the Global Fund spends, in 2017 alone, they spent $1 billion saving lives from AIDS across Africa. And so they work on a variety of different issues. But ultimately what they found, and the problem they came to us with, is that they had, they provide services and, provide PrEP and other kind of health and life-saving medical care to key populations across Southern Africa. But they found that actually there was certain groups who weren't accessing their service. And this is because there's virulent prejudice in many countries against gays, lesbians, transgender people, and sex workers. And this often means that these minorities are too ashamed or afraid to access life-saving medical care. So our task was to reduce stigma and discrimination against these groups so that they felt safer accessing medical care and protection, but hopefully as well that they felt more accepted by their communities. So the strategy here was to help people feel safe about, ultimately accessing medical help. But in order to understand, again, where the needle lies and what the problem is, we worked not only with the key populations and conducted focus groups and in-depth interviews across these 8 countries with these populations to understand, the stigma and discrimination they faced, and also their reluctance to access services and why. But we also worked with the community and with people both facilitating and implementing services, but also the general community to understand what the stigmas were and concept testing ways in which we can actually address these stigmas. What we realized is strategists work to create concepts and messaging and approaches from these groups to work with people then to understand what would and wouldn't work. And first and foremost, they found that if you condemn abuse of minorities, it only really confirms that abuse is the norm. So instead of, doing it again, a kind of top-down telling people what to do, this was instead, the approach was decided that it would be about highlighting stories of acceptance. So highlighting positive stories rather than demonstrating a message that, says do or don't do such a thing. And what they found is creating empathy increases acceptance far more than the clever, rational argument. So the focus here instead was in creating empathy. So the research informed the work that the strategists then did to look at 3 ways that they identified in which to open minds, they call it. So again, this is about reframing things. Instead of it being a do, it's about shifting and opening, and it's a very positive approach that focus both from an emotional angle on humanizing and de-othering minorities to create empathy, from a social angle, demonstrating role models and change social norms, and then also displacing negative narratives with positive narratives. And so once they identified the strategists that these were the 3 main ways in which they'd create their campaign, they then looked at what was the key way of reaching people. And radio is extremely popular across the 8 countries that we were working in. So the proposition was to create a radio drama that actually showcased and highlighted stories of change and stories of hope. And so together with our creatives, we created a radio drama series, which facilitated people knowing minority characters and seeing their acceptance by others. And this was a drama called People Like Us, and 13 episodes were recorded in multiple languages in order to suit the country that we were working with, and played across multiple radio stations from countries including Botswana to Swaziland. The campaign itself reached over 36 million people across Southern Africa, which is nearly a third of the population. And it was created not only a radio show, but there was a lot of other collateral created around it, including websites, apps, posters, all of which, had a positive framing around stories of hope and acceptance. We then decided that we wanted to measure not only people's attitudes to understand, the acceptance of this campaign and the success of the campaign, but for real evidence of change, we decided to look, rather than the survey, we decided to look at public sentiment. So we worked with in-house marketing analysts, monitor sentiment and changes in sentiment. So this is social listening about minorities on every online forum we could track. And so this was using Crimson Hexagon, an analysis tool that tracks all accessible, publicly available shared content online, including social media, blogs, forums, and comments, and sharing sites, and basically looks at sentiment around the key themes. And in this case, it's a sentiment around the minorities. And ultimately, amazingly, we found a shift, albeit still negative, but a shift in sentiment around the key population groups online in every country. Furthermore, the campaign was actually nominated for an APG Creative Strategy Award last year, and it came silver, which was very exciting. And then ultimately, I'm not saying that the campaign informed us, but around the same time, Botswana decriminalized homosexuality. So there is, this was one part of a whole of ways in which norms and attitudes were shifting in some of these countries. So that was a very brief overview of how research and strategy informs social marketing campaigns. I'm more than happy now to talk about either social marketing or any questions people have. Or I also realize as well, a lot of the themes around the Connection series more generally has been around careers. So I'm more than happy as well, as a person with a diverse career to date, to talk about, answer any questions as well about careers. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Gillian. That was really, really interesting. And those campaigns really seem to, you were sort of being quite modest about that in a way, but those campaigns really did seem to have an impact. I think you've already got some questions. Joanna, did you want to start us off?
Of course. First of all, thank you so much, Jill. That was so informative and so great to see a variety of campaigns, both that you had worked on and that have been quite influential over the years. I wanted to ask you specifically about 2012 and specifically about COVID-19. I thought it might be interesting to see if you had worked on any specific campaigns to do with the coronavirus and public health, or in general, any insights you might have about how social marketing has been changed in 2020, and if there's anything that you might be able to point us in the direction of in terms of positive campaigns or campaigns that did well.
Yes, sure. So we certainly have been working on COVID-19. And what has happened is, with quite a few of our government clients, so both the UK government and other countries, some of the work that we were doing around issues such as sexual and reproductive health, for example, in East Asia, we actually shifted some of the campaign to focus on COVID-19. And so here, again, it's identifying almost, COVID is such a multi-dimensional problem. And, there's so many ways in which people need to shift their behaviors, and, various different mechanisms in which we need to, kind of try to promote amongst societies to actually prevent the spread and also to keep people safe and healthy. And so, depending on the situation, depending on the country, what we did was we actually shifted the communications and the marketing campaigns that we were working on to focus on almost like the lowest hanging fruit within that country. So for example, if you're living in a very densely populated country where a lot of people convene in places of worship, a lot of our communications focus first and foremost on, highlighting that actually at the moment, it's although it might be part of your religion to convene every day in a place of worship, that actually at a time like this, it's safer not to convene, and there's other ways of actually worshiping in a time like this. So it was very much identifying first and foremost what the problem is, and almost like what the lowest hanging fruit around COVID is. So I just showcased as well, there's a slide earlier on that highlighted the NHS campaign that Saatchi worked on for COVID, which very much focuses on obesity, because as we know, obesity is one factor that actually, it makes your risk of COVID even higher. And so here we focused on obesity, and that, ultimately that, even if you make small shifts in the way that you eat and move, this can ultimately help you and may decrease your risk of actually contacting or else being sick from COVID. So yeah, so we've worked in a variety of different ways, and really, again, it's about being bespoke to the country's need and the target audience's need as well.
Thank you, Gillian. You have, should we take some questions from our participants, our attendees? You have, actually, you've generated already a number of questions. I have a question for you here. How do we get people to change bad behavior through marketing? And the attendee says, I'm working on a project on plastic pollution. What things should I consider? Now, I'm not sure if you want to address that specifically, but the main question is, how do we get people to change bad behavior through marketing?
Well, I think the key is Rome wasn't built in a day. So I think sometimes we, myself included, there's so many behaviors that I want to adopt in life and then fall by the wayside so quickly. And so it's really about small changes and identifying ways in which you can facilitate just making these changes easier for somebody. So a bad behavior is quite a big thing. And it's about almost like identifying ways in which you can, ultimately try to tear apart that bad behavior, but in a more smaller scale, but long-term achievable way. So for example, with plastic, one of the main reasons that we all use plastic so often is, again, ease and convenience. So here, for example, using your research or also learning from other successful campaigns, you need to identify what is it that the small incremental change that I can get people to make on a daily basis that would then lead to ultimately the disintegration of bad behaviors. So it's about being creative, but it's also about thinking in terms of this idea of rather than the fireworks, but the bonfire instead. It's about thinking about ways, behaviors that, ending a bad behavior, it needs to be replaced by good behavior. So how do you bring the small but seismic shifts in people's lives to adopt this good behavior?
Good. Joanna,
I think in terms of, you mentioned figuring out how a behavior has changed, and I had a question about what the best way to measure something is. I know you mentioned social listening and net sentiment, and we also had a question about that from our audience that I'll follow up with.
So the question is, how's best to measure success?
Measure success of a campaign, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, what's most important is actually understanding reach. So that is, if you can, if you have the means to identify the actual reach of your campaign. So that might be through understanding through other third-party data providers. For example, the actual the audience viewings of the channels that you went out on, or if you're going digitally, looking at the metrics that you can create or collect around audience analytics. It's then about using clever research methods to actually understand how marketing imprinted, because it's one thing reaching people, but we're all so bombarded these days by a variety of different products and messages and behaviors, and we all have inertia. We all know what is good and what is bad. So it's ultimately about using research as well, applied research such as really deep, message testing with people to understand whether the messaging and the positioning actually worked. on whether people actually believed in it, or, you know, that whether people even consumed what you actually put out. I think as well, you can look at, you know, if you're looking at, for example, in some cases, it can be easier to identify whether your campaigns work, because you could like look at metrics of success, such as uptake of access to services around sexual and reproductive health centres in that area. But other times it's harder, and so you have to use a variety of different ways of trying to measure changes and shifts in attitudes or behaviours.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. And did you mention a platform to measure net sentiment, or a software, or did you just mention that you worked with researchers?
So Crimson Hexagon is something we use, but usually we use a variety of different ways of social listening. So also LexisNexis is another platform, and I'll be shot now because there's more and I can't remember the name of them. But yeah, what we do is actually employ a variety of different ways of social listening, and looking at that through social media, through online media, and then also through blogs and other platforms.
Great.
Thank you.
Joanna, shall I mention you have a question here from Arami Dalal, who asks, is a social marketing campaign similar to a CSR campaign in your view?
It can and it can't be. I think it's, you know, it depends. I think that social marketing is quite a broad brush term that we use that can include more applied advocacy campaigns that are quite grassroots level. And so I think in a very broad answer, not necessarily. Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Okay. You have actually, you've got a specific question here, which is definitely just aimed at you, and it's from Wallace Motta. What advice would you give to PhD graduates that want to return to work in industry as you have done?
I believe, I think the hardest thing I've learned in general, and this is my advice more generally for anybody in terms of their career, and it's something I struggled with a lot, and I think we all struggle with a lot, but it's about being tenacious and selling yourself, and knocking on as many doors as you can, and, you know, really reaching out to organizations that you're interested in working in, and looking at what you've done and framing what you've done as a way, you know, of, selling what you've done, because I'm sure anybody on this call will have great experience and or is working on their way to building a very strong academic and other experience. So it's ultimately about building confidence, even if you exert it on the outside but are terrified on the inside. I think it is about, identifying and targeting people that you'd like to work with, trying to get any kind of work experience with those types of organizations, and looking at what you've done and how you actually package and sell that to employers as well.
Good advice, yes. Joanna, do you have?
In terms of careers, we did have an attendee asking specifically about whether Saatchi offered any undergraduate summer internships, but I guess alternatively, if there's any others that you might know that might be good for our students.
So in the old world order, Saatchi certainly did do summer internships, and so I advise. I'm sure that they'll be hopefully working towards it again this summer. So I advise going to the Saatchi website and looking there. It should be. I can't tell you now because I know they've just changed the website, but it should be, if you look up Saatchi and careers, it should come up, and then there'll be a way in which you can either apply now or find out when the next call is going to be.
Sure. Can I ask you about, in terms of your presentation? I just wondered, I'm looking at the campaigns that you showed us, which were really interesting. Do you yourself have any particular beliefs about what works best to change people's behavior when it comes to social marketing? I mean, do you approach problems in a very similar way, or do you take each problem and think, well, actually, the techniques here or the methods we might want to use or the messaging has to be completely different because of X, Y, and Z or whatever?
Yeah, so great question. So I personally feel that sometimes with anything, I feel that there is a tendency sometimes just to look at what's been done and to replicate that in some way, or to think you know your audience when in fact you might not at all. So I think what's really important, and certainly what I'm very passionate about personally, is first and foremost, before you undertake any successful social marketing campaign, is really actually working with people from your target audience, because it's all well and good thinking that, oh, if I parachute into this country and do this, that this is going to work. But I always take that things from my perspective and know if I was at home in the village I'm from in Ireland and somebody from Vietnam turned up at my door and started telling me to do this behavior, do that behavior, I might be slightly, I wouldn't know what was going on. So first and foremost, you need to work with your local population and really understand what is it for them, that, what is the problem and what are ways in which you can try somewhat to resolve that problem, or, to ultimately to, shift attitudes or behaviors. So I think, I suppose in ways it's quite formulaic what we do in terms of first and foremost engaging with and working with your target audience. But then in other ways, it does mean then that there's quite a different approach with every campaign, depending on what your target audience is actually doing and what is it like, what are the barriers and the enablers to this particular issue.
Yeah, interesting. Joanna, did you have any questions to raise?
Question that's more oriented toward art, which could be quite interesting. And our attendee has asked, they're working toward changing people's attitude toward art, in particular, since it seems to be something non-essential. So they were wondering if you, Joe, have ever worked with a similar campaign or anything related to the arts. I think you mentioned a couple there, but I think, with arts as like the main focus of the campaign.
So it was something I would love to work on, because I feel quite passionately about the fact that it's deemed non-essential at the moment at times like this. But I think, I haven't actually worked in it, but I think first and foremost, I would look at, who are you missing? So I believe personally, and maybe I'm wrong, but I believe that art, has quite a distinct audience quite often, of a certain age and a certain social demographic background. So I think, when thinking about trying to, really sell art or trying to open others' world to art, it's about first and foremost identifying who's not consuming it. And then ultimately why they're not, if possible, if you can access. I mean, I know more generally the arts in the UK is something that has had a lot of research in the past. So you might be able to identify secondary sources of data to understand who are the art, or whether it be art in itself or theatre or whatever it is, who's consuming it, who's not, why is there gaps, and how do you actually reach the people that you want to reach.
And following on from Reach, we've just had another question from Rami Dalal asking about social media. The question is, has social media had a positive impact in terms of social marketing, for example, TikTok?
Yes, so it really can. It can actually be one of the most successful channels of marketing, because first and foremost, it reaches everyone, and more and more, mobile uptake and adoption across the world is huge now. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, traditional advertising and marketing, such as above the line mechanisms like TV, radio, obviously cinema, billboards at the moment, people are seeing those less and less now, because we're spending more and more time with our heads down on our phone. So social media can be very successful. But what's key again is actually understanding the approach here. So rather than, again, I think what's not been successful sometimes in social media campaigns is campaigns that are very dry and rational. Like what works very well in social media is actually using the whole idea of positive deviance, they call it. So these are people like you who've adopted the behavior that you're trying to sell, or indeed, the shift in attitudes that, we're trying to achieve. So when done well, and when done by, again, it's learning from your target audience, who appeals to them, who are the messengers, what is the look and feel. Social marketing can be very successful, and it's certainly one of the cheapest and easiest ways to reach people.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you, Jo. Could I ask you? You mentioned, I love the phrase actually, that you don't light a bonfire, that you spread your budgets. It may not be top of mind of our attendees, but I just wonder, because spending a budget is really important part of marketing. I mean, do you set out with that view? I'm just trying to think it through. So you set out with spreading a budget over time rather than, having a big burst of activity.
Yeah. So we certainly do. We, I think again, it's about this idea of sustainability rather than one time point, big campaign. This is one of the reasons why when we're looking at the budget, we actually think about, what are collateral or pieces around this campaign that we can create that might have longer term use rather than just a one-time TV ad. We really think about, things collateral that might actually be around after the lifetime of the campaign, such as that sugar swap app, or indeed, various different either products or outputs that, may be used elsewhere, such as training materials and all of that. So yes, the whole idea, especially because we're working with non-commercial clients, we're very aware of budgets we're spending, and so we really want them to be spent wisely. And so it is about looking at ways in which you can build and sustain products rather than just creating a one-time point one.
Joanna, did you want to take the next? So I see we have a question from an attendee.
Yes, so we've had another question that's more personal, I guess. They wanted to know, Gillian, what prompted you to pursue a career in marketing, and whether you knew that that's what you wanted to do when you were at university.
I'm going to take the latter half first and say that I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do when I was at university. So I hope that comes as some solace to people, because I certainly didn't have that. Some of my friends seem to have quite linear pathways in life, and I feel like I did, and studying sociology didn't really, I really enjoyed the subject, but it left me none the wiser for a long time. But I think what was key was actually realizing what I enjoy. And so I've always really enjoyed research. And so I did first and foremost pursue a career in research. And then within research, I realized that what I find really appealing, because a lot of what I was working on was social issues that weren't changing. And so what I realized is what I really enjoy is working on, research and campaigns and various different, ultimately I like working towards change, or at least attempting change. And so this is how I kind of first and foremost, learned about the world of social marketing and social behavior change communications. And then really it was about, actually identifying and targeting organizations I wanted to work with and going from there. So it definitely wasn't an obvious. I think when you're not sure of what career you want, again, it doesn't have to be linear. It's about identifying what you really enjoy doing within what you're doing, and then finding ways which you can try and work on those types of areas with different organizations. And again, identifying organizations as well whose vision and values really align with yours.
I'm still trying to work out what to do.
Yeah. I think Joanna, we should have multiple careers anyway.
Joanna, did you have, I see time is escaping us. Did you have a question that you would like to ask Gillian?
I think just on an end note, what's a favorite campaign of yours that maybe you've worked on or that you've seen that you thought that was a great campaign for a fantastic cause that you haven't talked about yet today?
Oh, that's a great question. It's a tough one because there are so many, but I think quite a very simple one that is kind of almost like the advertising 101 or social marketing 101 when you first start working in this area is a campaign that went out in the US in the 80s, which just talks about the effect of drugs on the brain. And it was so simply done. A man was literally standing in a kitchen with a pan on heat in front of him, and he had an egg in his hand, and he said, "This is your brain." And then he cracks the egg into the frying pan and it just scrambles, and he says, "This is your brain on drugs." And it was just so simple. And then they had the kind of, so they had the simple messaging, and then they had the call to action afterwards, which was just basically around drugs in the US and services you could actually go to. And I just think it's ones like that. I'm sure after this call I'll think of better ones, but I think what I really enjoy seeing is very clever, simple, effective social marketing that, doesn't have a million behaviors to adopt or a million different messages. It's just the small, simple things and what mechanisms that we can look at and hopefully adopt on a day-to-day basis.
I guess simple imagery that can also be a little shocking does attract attention and retain attention when you don't have a quick amount, when you have to have a quick ad or a quick message. That can be really effective.
Yeah, I think it can be shock, it can be tugging at the heartstrings, it can be humor, it can be anything. It depends on the subject matter. And again, I mean, I'm sure I'll think of much cleverer ones after this, but I know quite a few that were like, or kind of guerrilla ones that are in places you least expect. So I suppose again, it's not uniform, and it does depend on both your target audience and the actual, behavior or issue that you're selling ultimately. But I think what it needs to be is simple enough that it sticks. And that's what everyone's trying to achieve. It's that, that either that ad or that poster, or whatever it may be, that you remember and very clearly why you remember it.
Well, thank you, Gillian. Thank you. I should say, Dr. Gillian Kingston, thank you for your presentation. On behalf of the business school, on behalf of the university, can I thank you? I think our attendees have really enjoyed your session. It was really some great cases that you showed us, and I think we could see your thinking coming through, the thinking of the agency that was coming through, and your approaches to social problems, social issues. And actually what was interesting was to see you talking about how campaigns can actually have the opposite effect, and not the positive effect that you necessarily want. And I think that comes from experience, as well as understanding, psychology, obviously very important in this case. Also for answering some very interesting questions about careers in marketing and from your own perspective. So thank you very much, Gillian. It's been a pleasure to have you with us this afternoon. And we wish you luck with the social campaigns that you are working on. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure to speak to you. And have a good evening and take care.
And thank you, Joanna, for your...
And thank you, Joanna, yes.
Yes, for such enthusiastically coming along and handling the questions and your own questions, which were really interesting. And good luck with your studies, Joanna.
Thank you.
We will look out for you.
Thank you.